Hello and welcome back, sleepywhatsit here with another miniatures video for you. In today's video, we're going to be doing an unboxing and product review of the Getting Started with Age of Sigmar magazine/book thing for the new edition of Age of Sigmar. This is on the surface looks very similar to the new intro book thing that came out for 40k 9th edition last year, other than, fantasy characters instead of sci-fi ones. But having flipped through the book a bit, I think it is actually significantly different. So with that little teaser out of the way, let's actually get into what's in here. So at least my copy came originally in a plastic bag, but it was reflecting from my studio lighting something fierce, so I've just removed that before we start filming here. What you get here is the Getting Started guide itself with a sprue with two models glued onto the front. So let's pop this plastic off here and see what we actually get. This is another of those weird old school rounded sprues like the 40k one had, instead of the more squared off sprues that you normally get from GW these days. I don't know if this is actually significant, presumably it just indicates it was made in a different factory, c'est la vie. Thing I noticed right off the bat here is, unlike the second edition easy to build models, Stormcast and Nighthaunt, these ones don't have integrated bases, just a standard black base. Bit of a mixed blessing there, since now your models are going to mesh better with the rest of your army as you build it up, but also you don't get the cool, more display style bases for your models. I suspect most people wanted standard bases instead of having a few models with their own distinct aesthetics, especially for battle line troops. Also looking at the sprue here, the Stormcast model doesn't have that horrible seam across the pauldron like the older designs did. Even though making videos about how to fix that has gotten me good views, I'm really glad they finally fixed that blemish in their design. Before getting into the book, I'm going to assemble these models so we can see what they look like. The book does provide us with assembly instructions, thankfully, though it is a relatively simple set of models to build. Just cut them out and do a bit of cleanup before assembly. Though the joints with the sprue are technically designed for you to be able to push them off, I personally just cut them out because that's my style. Also, since I'm a Luddite and I don't like friction-fit joints, I bore out the receivers a little bit and use some plastic cement to assemble my models. So this is what we get after we've assembled them. First, the new Stormcast Vindicator, ready to go poke people in the name of the God King. And here we have one of the new Kruleboyz Gutrippers, ready to go poke people because they don't like the look of them. Which I guess is really the same reasoning the Stormcast have for poking people. Let's move on to the book and its contents. The actual binding and print quality of the magazine is quite good. Solid binding that should stand up to wear, solid paper stock, good printing quality. Overall, it's a technically well-made magazine with nice art and things like that. Now let's see if the contents are as good as it looks. I'm going to show you here the table of contents so you can see what we're going to get while I'm talking about it. I like how this has the actual proper table of contents, unlike the 40k book, which just didn't feel as well organized. Putting the assembly instructions up front, I think, was a reasonable thing to do. They could have also put it on like the inside of the cover or the back cover, just so it was very visible and easy for people to pick up how to assemble them. Though the table of contents doesn't divide the book up in this way, there's kind of three major sections when you look at it: a lore section, a hobbying section, and a gaming section. The lore section gives us an introduction to the Age of Sigmar and the Immortal Realms in general, with some maps, a bit of lore background, explanation of the history, setting the tone for the world and some of the specific themes that they're pushing as part of the narrative for this edition. There's also a brief overview of the 4 grand alliances, with Order and Destruction getting double the number of pages plus imagery in comparison to Death and Chaos, which get a single page of text plus imagery. I think this is a reasonable introduction to the lore and the various alliances, though it is biased noticeably towards the Stormcast and the Kruleboyz as the major players. In the body text, there really isn't any mention of any other factions for Order and Destruction, just some of the other factions like Cities of Sigmar or Ogres models appear on some splash pages. And honestly, Chaos and Death, they get even shorter shrift because they just don't have much. They just have a broad description of what they are. I would describe this as more as an appetizer than your first real Age of Sigmar lore meal. I think the source of this is the fact that the Stormcast and Kruleboyz are what people are going to be seeing on things like the starter boxes, so they want to really push and emphasize, like, basically, this is the thing on the box, this is the lore behind them. They have also the newest sculpts, and they're going to be probably the most easily accessible in many stores. So it makes sense. Let's move on to the hobbying section, which covers collecting and painting. I was really quite happy with this section in comparison to the, I guess, rather trite coverage that the 40k book supplied. This felt like more of the old school how to paint at Citadel miniatures books from the 90s. There's just I think a more general discussion as opposed to like very specific instructions, though they do have those too. To begin with, they discuss the idea of collecting for display or play. There's also some discussion on how to choose a faction, though this to me was a bit thin because of the fact that they didn't get really into the different factions in a meaningful way, so it's not fully fleshed out, so it's really hard to make a decision. It would have been nice if they'd had like a couple pages with like a paragraph for each faction describing them, with maybe an example model of like a leader or something, just a little bit so that you can kind of get like an idea of what your options are, since I feel the earlier lore section didn't hit that well. There's a bit of advertising fluff here with like the current starter sets, the battle tomes, and the start collecting boxes. For the battle tomes and start collecting, I honestly don't know how they were selected, which got put in here, because some of the stuff that's in here is relatively old, but some of the newer stuff, like the start collecting boxes for Soul Flight Gravelords, wasn't shown. The second part of the hobbying section is this nice meaty 20 pages on painting your miniatures. This is obviously very biased towards the Citadel paint system. I honestly think they did a good job overall to introducing someone to painting. You got like a broad introduction to what the hobby is like, what supplies you're going to need, things like that. And then there's actually a lot of instruction about painting here. It starts with a nice introduction to like basically what the basic techniques are in a broad level, then talking a little bit about undercoating. Would have been nice if the word primer had shown up anywhere in there, but GW is going to GW. And then they kind of break down each fundamental technique, like how to base coat your model, how to shade your model, how to dry brush, how to do layering. And they even had a section discussing contrast paints and how to use them in a beginner-friendly way, which is, I think, something they haven't done a lot of previously. And beyond the fundamentals, they actually walk you through how to paint the models provided with the magazine. Both of them, they get painted to a battle-ready and a parade-ready standard, and they also show how to use traditional paints and contrast paints to do it. So this is a far more complete instructional book from GW than I've seen in years. So yeah, lore section was okay, and I think this hobby section was pretty great. So that leaves us one major section to discuss, and that's the actual gaming section. I think this was done far better again than the 40k version of this book that I reviewed like a year or so ago. Instead of spending a lot of pages doing a battle report like you would get in a White Dwarf, they instead focused more on introducing the main modes of play, open narrative match play. And then, like, seriously, the last third of this book is just the bloody core rules. Yeah, I know you can get these on free in PDF form on the website, but as a new player, you may not be aware of that. And it's also just really nice to have a nice physical thing that you can hold in your grubby little paws. Obviously, the rules between editions of Age of Sigmar have gone a little bit more complex, probably for the better, because they were probably a bit too thin. But I really like the fact that they can still express them in this kind of contained manner of like what is basically like 30 or so pages. Yeah, there are things like match play points and battle packs that aren't included here, but you have something that you get in this book that if you get some models and some dice, you can start playing around with your friends, which I think is honestly quite cool. And that's really what you want out of like a getting started guide, is something that you can actually play around with a bit. So now that we've gone kind of through the unboxing section, though we've already been doing a little bit of critique, let's do the proper review, though I think I've tipped my hand a little bit on this already. So overall, for $20 Canadian, or less at your local game store, I think this is a wonderful introduction to Age of Sigmar and miniatures in general. Obviously, it's very Games Workshop biased and doesn't provide you with like paintbrushes, paint, and things like that, but it's only $20. I think it does a very good job of taking someone that's interested in the hobby, they've heard of Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, they're like, this might be interesting to them, and introduces it to them in a logical, non-overwhelming manner. I would expect after reading this, if you were completely new to the hobby, you would have an idea if this is something that you want to put more time and energy into, or if it's just not something for you. I think they did a much better job in this book than they did for the 9th edition 40k book that I reviewed last year. It feels like this has been better edited, a lot more focused. I don't know if it's like different design teams that led to this, or if they looked at how that was received and really changed up, but I think they really went back to the drawing board and came up with a really good book here. I think they did a good job balancing the amount of lore and hobbying and gaming, so you could kind of get a nice, useful taste of each. The lore section was probably the weakest, as I've mentioned, but even then, it really wasn't like a failure or anything. I just would have structured it differently, maybe done a little bit pushing the new hotness and more giving a broad introduction. So yeah, if you're interested in Age of Sigmar, especially the new edition, and you're new to miniature wargames, I think this would be a great starting point for you to see if you're interested in it. Honestly, even if you're already familiar with miniatures, it's a reasonable point to get you an understanding of Age of Sigmar if you've never played a wargame or like Warhammer stuff. Though, if you're a little bit more experienced with miniature wargame stuff, it might just be better for you just to go grab the core rule PDF from the website and read through that and see if the system is to your liking. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video informative and enjoyable. If you did, please give it a like. If you want to see more content like this about miniatures and how to paint them, please subscribe to the channel. If you're looking for a way to more materially support the channel, I have an account over on Ko-fi for that. And other than that, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.